Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Grace. It is lovely to have you here. You find me on the 1st of October on a very miserable and gloomy day. I don't know if you can hear the rain, but it has been raining constantly all day, which personally I'm pretty happy about. Those are my kind of autumn vibes when it's raining outside and you can curl up indoors with a cozy book. Autumn is very much the season for all things cozy, and for me especially cozy fantasy. I feel like it's such a season of escapism as well. I just want to lose myself in a fantasy world. I need something with a little bit of magic to it. If you have been around for a while and watched my stuff since the beginning of my channel, then you may remember that the first video I ever made was a cozy book recommendation video. The coziest books I'd ever read, at the time at least. I think I'm wearing exactly the same outfit in this video. This is clearly my designated cozy outfit. My plan is to not mention any books that I have already mentioned in that other video, so if you want some more cozy recommendations after you're done with this video, then go and watch that one too, because those are also some of my absolute favourite cozy reads. But I've read quite a few more since then. Also, I noticed a trend while I was compiling the books for this video that some of them have a little bit of spook to them, a little bit more action and tension. They're all still cozy, I would say, but I think it's kind of perfect for autumn and October specifically, that some of them are a little bit more eerie and atmospheric at times. So I thought it would be fun to order them from what I think is the coziest book on this list to the one that has a little bit more bite to it. You may totally disagree with how I've ranked these, but I will do my best to explain without giving any spoilers. The first book, and the coziest book I think on this list, is The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love by India Halton. This is one of my favourite books that I've read so far this year. I loved it so much. This is a light academia fantasy, kind of in the vein of an Emily Wilde, but this definitely holds its own. It doesn't feel like a copy of Emily Wilde's by any means. This is the story of Beth, who is an ornithologist. This is set in an alternate historical version of our world, I'd say around the late 1800s, but in this version of the world there are magical birds and they cause a lot of havoc, but the study of ornithology is the practice of finding these birds, studying them, finding new species, and helping any birds that may be causing havoc or may be in danger themselves towards a safer space, which often involves capturing them so that they can be taken to a place of conservation. Now, at the start of this book, Beth is a very meagre character. She is very polite, and that's kind of her armor against the world. She currently serves as a bit of an apprentice to a leading ornithologist who is very bossy and inconsiderate. But early on in the story, a competition is announced to find one particular very rare bird, one of which has been spotted somewhere in the UK, and the winner of this competition will win Birder of the Year, as well as tenure at their university, which is what Beth is more excited about. Beth knows she has to go for this opportunity, but she comes up pretty immediately against an academic rival called Devon, who is also very dashing and charming and a bit of a rake. And the two of them end up duking it out to try to find this bird, but are of course also forced together a lot of the time through a lot of different shenanigans. There may be a little bit more to this competition than meets the eye. This was just so fun. I think India Halton clearly loves the romance genre and historical romance especially, and she knows all of the tropes so well that she can play around with them in really fun ways. So she'll kind of play on things like the one bed trope, the grumpy versus sunshine kind of thing, but to an extent where it feels very whimsical and very silly, but also done with a lot of love. You can tell that she really loves this genre herself and she's coming at it with a new eye, but also with respect for everyone who's come before in this genre. I had never read anything by India Halton before, and now I cannot wait to devour the rest of her books. I'd say this is one of the most romance heavy ones on this list, so if that's your vibe, cannot recommend the Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love enough. The next two on this list are both graphic novels, but the first one I want to talk about is Fangs by Sarah Anderson. This is a lovely little graphic novel about a werewolf and a vampire who fall in love throughout the course of this story. It's set in a modern world similar to our own, but there seem to be a lot of different magical creatures roaming around, and this is really just a series of vignettes of their life as they get to know each other, the weird little quirks of a relationship between a vampire and a werewolf. Each page kind of has a different, very endearing joke on it, and some of them are a little bit dark, I guess, because, you know, vampires suck blood. But it's perfect for the season and very light-hearted. It doesn't take itself very seriously at all. I really love the art style as well, and just the actual book itself is kind of set up with this cloth-bound, embossed aesthetic, kind of like a grimoire. It just really fits the vibe, but is very unserious. So if you want an easy, quick read that's just going to get you in that autumnal mood without it being too dark, then Fangs is the way to go. The next book on this list is a children's graphic novel series. This is the first book in the series, and this is Lightfall, The Girl and the Galdurian by Tim Probert. I picked this up from my library where I work, and it looked really cozy. The art style really called to me, and this was just a delightful fantasy read. This is about a young girl called Bee who lives with her granddad, who is a pig wizard. Together they craft medicines and tinctures for the local community. And one day when she is out gathering supplies, she finds a Galdurian. Galdurians are a race who most believe went extinct a long time ago, so this is very surprising. And Cad, this Galdurian, is looking for his people. He believes they're still out there, and he thinks that Bee's granddad, the pig wizard, is the right person to help him in his search. But when they get back to Bee's home, they find that her granddad has gone missing. So begins a quest to go and find him in the wilderness. They go through a lot of different trials and they face a lot of different dangers, learn new things about the world, and grow to really lean on each other. Cad is such a bright and optimistic character, and Bee has pretty strong anxiety that is depicted in such an interesting way in here. There's a specific art style that is used when her anxiety is flaring up, and I thought that was so interesting. The world building in here is also really fun. In this setting, the sun died hundreds of years ago, and there are lights that have been erected in the sky to keep this place going. Like I said, this is the first in the series. I think there are just 3, and I have ordered the second one in at my library because I really enjoyed this one. And of course it is a very cozy read. There is action in here and darkness and threat. Things do happen, but it is still a kid's read. The illustration is very light and cute. So again, if you need an easy, cozy read this season, the first book in the Lightfall series, The Girl and the Galdurian. The next book on this list is Can't Spell Treason Without Tea by Rebecca Thorne. Now this has very much done the rounds in the cozy circuit. A lot of people have compared this to Legends and Lattes. This is the story of Raina and Kianth, 2 women who have fallen in love and want to get away from their responsibilities so that they can be together and open up a cute little tea shop slash bookstore. The only problem is that Kianth is a very powerful magic user who holds a lot of political power in the neighbouring country, and Raina is one of the personal guards for the very vindictive queen of this country. So escaping from their responsibilities is going to be a little bit difficult. I think if you enjoyed Legends and Lattes, this is probably a safe bet for you. There is definitely more action in this one because the threats that are kind of coming after these guys, they're definitely a bit more powerful than anything we see in Legends and Lattes, but at the same time this allows so much room for the relationship between these 2 women, for the development of their tea shop slash bookshop, and also for them to get to know this new area that they've settled down in, to get to know the people there and all of their different quirks. But I did personally enjoy having a little bit more action in there to pull me along. Also, this edition, stunning. This is just a classic cozy fantasy, I think. You really can't go wrong with can't spell treason without T. Next up is a book I don't have with me because I just lent it to my mum to read, and this is Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho. I actually read this one a while back and I don't know why I didn't include it on my first list. I think maybe because there is one particular moment in here that kind of shook me out of my coziness, which is why it's a little bit higher on this list. I cannot explain it in any more detail without giving spoilers. This is another historical fantasy set in an alternate version of the UK, I think around the 1800s, but please don't quote me on that, I'm not sure. In this world, the Fae exist, magic exists, and the royal court has a sorcerer royal that they keep in their employ, and Zacharias Wythe has just been appointed to the job. Now, he is an immigrant and a freed slave, so a lot of people aren't happy about this at all, and he really has to struggle to hold on to his power. And this is exacerbated by the fact that the country's stores of magic seem to be drying up. So when Zacharias tries to visit Fairyland to figure out what is going on, and on the way ends up stumbling across a young woman who seems to have a powerful gift for magic, despite the fact that women aren't really meant to practice magic at this time. The two of them end up flung together, largely because she really wants out of her current life, she wants to learn magic, and together they need to figure out how to solve this problem, how to bring magic back to the United Kingdom. I read this one quite some time ago. I'd really like to give it a reread, especially because there is more to this series, but I remember it feeling quite Austen in the way that it was written. It was very witty and humorous, but also had a little bit of bite to it, especially from our female main character, Prunella. She was a character to be reckoned with, which I really enjoyed. I will say, if you're going into this hoping for a big romance plot, then you might be a bit disappointed. I wouldn't say that that is the main aspect of this story, although it may be there, but I think that Zen Cho is just such a great writer and really made me feel like I was reading Austen but with magic. So that is Sorcerer to the Crown. Little tea break. Next up we have Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. Now this is a lovely short novella that I think can really get you in the spirit. This is a twisted fairy tale, and this has always been pitched to me as a bit more on the spooky side. When I read this, I didn't expect to be able to put it on a list like this, but honestly this did feel quite cozy. I think mostly because the main character was so endearing, and so was the main other character that we ended up interacting with throughout this novella. This is the story of Toadling, who was born human but was stolen by the fairies as a baby and switched for a changeling. Now Toadling grew up in Fairyland and had a very warm, lovely childhood with these kind of frog fairy creatures, and because of this she has changed to the point where she is no longer fully human herself. But years later she is called upon by the Fae to perform a favour. They want her to return to the human world and perform a blessing on a child. Centuries later, a knight approaches a tower surrounded by thorns and tries to get inside to break a curse. But if Toadling can do anything about it, this curse will not be broken. This does definitely have a bit of a dark twist to the classic Sleeping Beauty fairy tale. Not that the original story isn't dark enough anyway, just in a different way. But Toadling is such a kind and lovely character. I just couldn't help but feel my heart warming to her, and also the way that she has been hidden away doing her duty for so long that she is very out of touch with the world around her makes her even more endearing, especially when she meets a character from the modern times and has to try to figure out how things have changed in her absence. There is tension in here and a bit of an underlying sinisterness, but I would say overwhelmingly this still felt cozy to me. And even T. Kingfisher, in the acknowledgements of this one, says that she thinks it's a sweet story, at its core at least. But you have been warned, there is darkness to this one too, but I think that just makes it perfect for the season. So that is Thornhedge. The next book on this list is one that I never thought I would put so far up on this scale towards a little bit of spooky, a little bit of tension, and this is Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood. Now this came out very recently, I think last week maybe 2 weeks ago, and this was a highly anticipated release for me because I watch Lucy Jane Wood on YouTube. She has her own kind of booktube, kind of cozy lifestyle channel, and when I heard she was bringing out a cozy witchy book, I was so excited. But I was a little bit nervous that the writing might not be that wonderful because, as we know, I think we've all been burned by YouTube books in the past. But I needn't have worried. I think the writing in here is really good. This is the story of Belle Blackthorn, who is a witch but has kind of let go of her powers. She still uses them, but in very minor ways. She doesn't really feel like she's living up to her full potential. She also works at a bookstore where she's kind of letting the awful boss trample all over her and crush all of her dreams of helping this to be the most beautiful and cozy place it can be. And when on her 30th birthday, Belle is summoned to appear at her coven for a trial, she finds out that her magic is not deemed up to scratch, and the only way she can save her magic from being taken away is by completing several trials before the month of October is up. She is put in contact with an unlikely mentor who has a bit of a mysterious past with the coven, and there's a very frustrating warlock watchman on her back all the time. I will say I wouldn't go into this one for the romance at all. There is a little bit of romance in here, but it's very much not the main part of the plot, and I would say it is probably the least strong part of this story. It wasn't egregiously bad or anything, it just didn't connect with me in the way that many other parts of this story did. I think where this one really shines through is the main character's relationships with her friends and her family, and also the constant metaphor for magic as potential, and how at 30 you can really feel like you haven't lived up to your potential, you haven't achieved the things that you wanted for yourself and really been the best version of yourself in order to be the happiest that you can be. I thought Belle was a really interesting character. She's very flawed and she has a tantrum every now and then. Her emotions felt very real to me. I also really just enjoyed reading about a female main character who wasn't 25 or under. Not that 30 is old by any means, but it still feels like an age we don't get to read about enough. So this was very cozy. But I will say there was a lot more plot and intrigue to this one than I expected. I don't think this ever gets to the point where it's particularly scary or anything, but there is definitely some action in here, and I felt like I needed to reflect that in my placement on this list. There are some undercurrents in here that I definitely didn't expect going in. I thought this was just going to be a cozy ride, and there's a bit more bite to it than that. But if you are craving that kind of 90s vibe witchiness, although this is still very timeless, then Rewitched is the way to go. Now next up, we have another T. Kingfisher book, which I think some people might totally disagree with me putting higher on this list than Thornhedge, because it is marketed as one of her cozier reads, and this is Paladin's Grace. This is actually the first in a series. I haven't read the other ones yet, but I definitely mean to. This is set in a fantasy world where our main character Stephen is kind of a paladin. He used to be a paladin, but then his god died. So now he has all of the pent-up magic and power of a paladin, but nowhere for that to be fulfilled because his god is no longer around to follow. This is something that Stephen really struggles to deal with every day, as do all the other members of his paladin order. But everything changes when he stumbles upon a fugitive named Grace in the streets, and the two of them accidentally end up witnessing an assassination attempt gone wrong together and end up embroiled in this investigation, whilst at the same time a cryptic killer is on the loose. So you see what I mean about there being some tension in this one? I think the romance comes to the forefront of this one and definitely does sway this book back towards cozy, but there are some dark things happening in the background, as is T. Kingfisher's way, as we know by now. This was my first book that I read by T. Kingfisher, and I had the most fun time. It made me laugh out loud on many occasions, and I really loved Stephen as a main character. He kind of lent into that protective, classic, manly funny kind of character that you get in romance, but at the same time could be very gentle and self-deprecating, and his perspective was always really funny, I felt. The romance between the pair was really lovely, and all of the other side characters were really interesting as well. I can't wait to hopefully see more from them in the future books in this series. I should also warn you that this is mostly kind of readable as a standalone, but one of the threads in here does kind of carry on towards the next book. There's a little bit of a cliffhanger. I think you could probably read it on its own if the main thing you care about is the romance, but if you're the kind of person who's going to get hooked on a mystery, then you may be starting a series with this one. So that is Paladin's Grace. Next up is my boyfriend's favourite book of all time, and I think this is perfect for spooky season because it is very cozy really, but vibe-wise and thematically this has spooky season written all over it, and this is The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon. This is set in such a fun fantasy world. I think this book has one of my favourite world building styles that I've ever read. It's kind of a modern setting, but the weirdest random changes are made, like people drive around in auto ducks. Like, what was the need for that change? But also, I love it. This is the story of Heart and Mercy. Heart being a bit of a cowboy almost. He's a marshal, which in this setting means that he ventures across the veil into the kind of different reality that exists through a veil near to where this is set. And this other reality is infested with what are called drudges. They're basically zombies. Now Heart's job is to combat these grudges when they appear, and also to take bodies back to the other realm in which all of the actual people live so that they can't then be reanimated. And Mercy is an undertaker, so the two of them end up forced together quite a bit, mostly when Heart is dropping off bodies for her, and they do not get along in the slightest. But Mercy is really struggling with her family not understanding her, and Heart is very lonely. So when Heart reaches out into the ether one day and pens a letter to no one in particular, and it ends up at Mercy's door, the two of them end up writing back and forth to each other without knowing that that's who they're writing to. It's very you've got mail. The romance is definitely the main part of this story, and their kind of bickering to lovers pipeline is done so well. It's such a fun time. All of the side characters in here as well I think were so well written, especially Duckers. Penrose Duckers, still one of my favourite characters in anything I've ever read. He is the apprentice that Heart begrudgingly takes on, and he is so funny and endearing, and I just love him so much. So this is cozy, but there is still very much a threat from these grudge zombie type creatures, and Heart is very much putting himself in a lot of danger anytime he steps across that veil. So if you want a cozy, fluffy, fun romance with a little bit of spice as well, but that also has a bit of that spooky fantasy bite to it, then The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy I think definitely fits that brief. And last but certainly not least on this list is a book that I just read the other week, and this is Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. Now this is the first in a duology, and I haven't read the second one yet, but I'm definitely going to get to it soon. This is the story of Tobias, who is known by the local people as the Wild Man of Green Hollow. He is tethered to the forest, but he lives a pretty cozy existence in a little cottage with a little cat, and he tries not to think about his past too much. But when a new owner arrives at the local hall, who is intensely curious about everything, he finds himself making a friend for the first time in many, many years, at least the first one who isn't a tree. Henry Silver is caring and inquisitive and spends a lot of his time studying folklore, and his appearance ends up dredging up some old secrets that Tobias really would have preferred to keep buried. This one, I don't know if it needs to be at the top of this list. I think my vision is skewed about how cozy or sinister this one is because I listened to the audiobook of this one, and the voice of the audiobook narrator I found so soothing. It felt like being a child again, being read a fairy tale by my dad. If you're going to read this one, I really cannot recommend the audiobook enough. I don't know if this would have felt as cozy as it did if I'd read it physically instead. This definitely has some dark moments to it. I would say overall, because of the way that you fall for these characters, this is still a cozy read, but this definitely has that eerie, autumnal, lost in the woods kind of feeling to it that I personally really enjoy. This was a very short read, so I'm really interested to see where things will go in the second book, but I definitely think that if your favourite vibe for autumn is the kind of eerie, spooky, but at the same time cozy forest, then Silver in the Wood is the perfect choice. So those are all of the recommendations I have for you today. I hope you found something that appeals to you, that feels like your perfect balance of coziness and a little bit of bite and spook to it for the autumn season. I do just want to say that I realise this is quite a white reading list. I honestly have really struggled to find cozy fantasy by BIPOC authors. There is of course the Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, which I absolutely love, but I recommended that one in my last video. I'm so excited for the next book in that series though. But it does seem really strange to me, the lack of diversity within this genre, unless I am just looking in totally the wrong places. So if you have any recommendations for cozy fantasy written by authors of colour, I would absolutely love for you to pop them in the comments so that I can hear about them and so that the rest of us can diversify our reading a bit more as well. There are 2 more books I would like to talk about that I have not read, but are written by BIPOC authors and are coming out later this year, and I'm very excited for both of them. First of all, we have a book that I think comes out in about a week. October 8th is the date that I have here, and this is Shoestring Theory by Mariana Costa. This seems kind of mad. This is a fantasy in which everything has gone wrong. The kingdom is broken, the king has descended into paranoia and madness, and his husband is currently living in a little hut by the sea, trying to run away from the guilt that he has for his part in letting the kingdom get to this point. So this man, Cyril, ends up using the last of his magic to complete a very powerful spell to send him back in time to before everything went wrong, back to when the king's older sister is still alive and still first in line to the throne instead of him, and back before their romance has fully bloomed. He only hopes that if he can stop his future husband from taking the throne, then he can fix everything. But the powerful magic of their wedding vow that hasn't yet taken place seems to be reaching through time and space to get in the way of things. This sounds so chaotic, but also like a lot of fun. It's been compared to Legends and Lattes, but also I think kind of fanfiction in the wildness of it. It's described as a friends to lovers to enemies to lovers, and there's also a crow familiar called Ganache. So, I mean, what more could you want, really? I think this one sounds like a lot of fun. So that is Shoestring Theory by Mariana Costa. And the other one I want to mention, I believe comes out on November 5th, and this is The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leong. This is the story of Teo, who is an immigrant fortune teller who travels between villages telling only small fortunes because she knows from experience that telling big fortunes has big consequences. She has a pretty lonely life, but she is running away from something, so at least it is better than the life that she's left behind. But things really take a turn for her when she is recruited by a mostly reformed thief and an ex-mercenary recruit to hunt for a missing child. They are also joined by a baker, and in the description it says, a baker with a need for adventure, and a magical cat, of course. So this sounds very heavy on the found family aspect. It sounds like we're gonna have a full cast of very quirky and fun characters, which is always my favourite thing. And it sounds like Teo has some issues from her past that may flare up again and get in the way of this new family that she's building. This sounds very cozy and sweet. I am pretty frustrated, I'm not gonna lie, because the cover I have up here is the American cover, and I just think it is so stunning. This is the UK cover, which I also think is really, really nice, but that US cover is gorgeous. So I think I will try to get this one out of the library to have a read of, and if I really, really like it, I may have to find a way to get my hands on that American cover because it is so stunning. So that is The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Leong. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found a new cozy book to dive into this autumn. Like I said, if you have any recommendations for cozy fantasy by BIPOC authors, I would absolutely love if you could drop those in the comments. It is definitely an area I personally need to expand on, and let me know if you have any other cozy reads that you're very excited to get to in the next couple of months. That is all from me. It's getting properly dark and gloomy now, so I'm gonna go and curl up myself and get some more reading done. I hope that you are having a wonderful start to your October, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye.